2001, I got this really strange phone call from this woman that said, Sandy Belzer, my name is Elaine Willman, and I want to meet you, and I think we should get some strong women together and have a meeting. I don't even know if we ever had that meeting. I have no idea. I can't remember. But that was quite a while ago. And she had started this wonderful organization called the Stand-Up Committee. And because somebody said you can't buy alcohol anywhere on the reservation land, which does not include Wapato, Topnoosh, and Hera. But somehow people were caving in. And Elaine's like, you know what, I don't care what it is. You can't tell me what I can and cannot buy. That's not right. And she started working, formed a group, and got it, boy, off the ground. And in fact, that's why she called me, and that's how I met my husband, was through that organization. So he was the E.F. Hunting guy in the back of the room. So anyway, Elaine has gone from that early years of being driven to knowledge and being mentored by my husband to, she just flew so far, so fast. With her studies, she's just a student I mean, just an ambitious student when she sinks her teeth in, and she learned, and she learned, and she learned, and she is now one of the nation's experts, if not the nation's expert. She's written 2 fabulous books, and, well, asking, what do you say?
Fabulous.
I mean, you're the one that said, oh, I got both those books, we're gonna, you know, so it's kind of exciting that, and if you didn't get it signed before, I bet you get it signed tonight. So, which is probably why you brought it. Anyway, so Elaine is brilliant, she's hard studying, and her belly's full of fire for what's going on in this nation, our state on steroids, and our county maybe even on more steroids. It's a mess. And so she's going to do a little unraveling of that and give us some information at all 3 levels. With what's going on in the court system now and where we're going and what's happening and more. Did I leave anything out? So I'd like you to welcome my friend, Elaine Willman, and one of my husband's very best friends in the world.
Thank you, Sandy. That was really exaggerated. But I'll take it. I'll take it. I want to do something I've never done in a talk anywhere I've given. I've never dedicated a little talk to somebody, but Sandy mentioned this wonderful husband of hers, Philip Brendale. He's a Cowlitz Indian, and I was one of the Toppenish community leaders, and we have some of that gang here tonight. We're still alive. That fought the tribe saying banning alcohol on the reservation. That would have shut down 47 beautiful wineries. I mean, that's wine country, grape country. And that was one of the first things we tackled when we had no clue what we were doing, but by golly, we were going to fight them. And we won. And that kind of really kicked things off. And then Philip. The reason I want to dedicate this to Philip is Philip put me on a life path and I didn't know it. And I got to tell this cute little story about when our first little community group was gathering together, this little citizen stand-up committee in Toppenish. And we're going to hold a meeting, and by God, we're not going to let a tribal government govern us. And back in the corner of the room is this mean-looking Indian standing there. Never said a word. He came to our first 3 meetings, and we're standing there with our knees knocking, figuring he's some kind of spy or something. And by the 3rd meeting, he comes up and he says, I've been looking for people like you for 25 years. How can I help? And he became my mentor. And Philip has a Supreme Court landmark case, Brendale versus Confederated Tribe of the Yakimas. Philip is brilliant on Indian law and judicial rulings. He's brilliant on federal Indian policy. And he's one of those Native Americans that completely values and cherishes his ancestry and his culture, but he is American first and thinks the reservation system and tribal governments have been horrific to Native Americans. And so here I'm getting mentored by this Indian. I want to dedicate this talk this evening, and I'm going to be a little bolder than usual because Philip is in grave peril. He's 85 and he's in very grave condition. I spent some time with him this morning, and it may be the last time I see him. And I've been in touch with Sandy for several weeks now, and he's going to be a huge loss in just as an individual. One of the bravest, most courageous people I've ever met, and he put that stuff into me too, because prior to that I was pretty much a pansy, you know. But I'm not a pansy anymore. And the older I get, the meaner I get, you know, and the louder I get. Because you know, us little old ladies, we just tell it like it is. I mean, you know, I got nothing to lose. I'm done raising my kids, my grandkids, and I'm not ever going to be muzzled again. That's a lot about what I want to talk about tonight. So I want to dedicate this to Philip Brendale. I also want to thank Dana and the Yakima County Republican Liberty Caucus for inviting me here. And I want to introduce a gal that makes everything possible for me, Laura Lee O'Neill. Laura's hiding behind a camera over there. But Laura is my road warrior. She makes everything happen, and she also has put up a magnificent website that you folks might want to subscribe to and follow. It's called thiswestisourwest.com. And it's all little letters, thiswestisourwest.com. And we have an icon for all the western states, and we post what's going on in the various states on not just Indian policy, but other things that are affecting the elimination of our food production, or nailing our farmers and irrigators, our cattlemen, our property owners, our citizens, nailing us, nailing the West. It's a really excellent website, and Laura does a wonderful job. There's cards over on the table. Also on the table are my books. Briefly, the first book I wrote while I was still living in Toppenish, Going to Pieces, and just quickly, if any of you remember the movie Thelma and Louise, these two wacky ladies that took a road trip. Well, me and a wonderful gal, videographer, Cammie Beal, we took a road trip when I was getting into this, and I had enough education and mentoring from Philip to say, I gotta see what's going on everywhere else. Cammie Beal and I, with a national organization that funded the trip, Cammie Beal and I took a road trip from Washington State to New York, across 17 Indian reservations. And for a couple of gals to go out in the middle of nowhere, we would drive one day and video the next. And we videoed farmers, tribal members, cattlemen, teachers, bankers, folks that lived on the reservations. And they had felt so unheard, because mainstream media will never talk about what's really going on the reservations. These people felt so unheard and so grateful to have us where they could speak their minds. And I promised every one of them that we were going to do a documentary that I'd get the story told. And I had 130 hours of film, and we couldn't get all those stories in a little documentary. But as a young gal, I was a medical transcriptionist. I typed really fast. And I just put those videos in and relived that trip. And that's what Going to Pieces is. It's the story of these two wacky broads that took this road trip across these Indian reservations, and it's the voices of all the people we talk to. And you accidentally get educated on Indian policy as you read the story. And it was, again, a life-changing experience. I am Cherokee, and I've said this for years. I've said I'm French and Cherokee because my folks told me all my life I'm French and Cherokee. And then Elizabeth Warren pops up. And she's Pocahontas. And I'm out on the country saying, oh, I'm French and Cherokee. And I thought, you know, I better validate that. You know, I knew that I had my mother and grandmother's enrollment numbers from the Cherokee tribe. I had that documentation. But I thought, you know, after she got into trouble, I thought I better have my DNA. So I send off for it, and it comes, I'm thinking, here it comes, you know. And my largest percentage, 30%, Native American, Southeastern United States, Cherokee. I'm 30% in Cherokee. And then I'm 24% Irish. I'm 0 French. So then I'm thinking, I'm an Irish Indian. And I'm also 43 years sober. It's no damn wonder I drank. You know what I mean? I just turned 43 years sober. And I'm an Irish Indian. And my family was a whole history of drinking problems. So, in any event, I just wanted to give that little introduction. The second book, the Slumbering Thunder book, is kind of a collection of best practices, experiences, some of the commentaries I've written, and it's really kind of a reference tool for community leaders, elected officials, county commissioners, if I could get them to take a peek. Yeah. So the second book is, I did in 2016, and that's a really good, that you don't have to read that one cover to cover, because it's a reference manual. You can just read sections as you wish. But the Going to Pieces story is that story of me and Cammie Beal. And you know, I'm sorry to say that Cammie was 53. But she's a little younger than that when we took the trip. But I lost Cammie to cancer here a couple of years ago. And she was such a warrior. She was such a fighter. She was younger than me, more fierce than me, and studied as hard as me, and she was, you know, we were a team. And it was just a huge loss to lose her when she was so much younger than me. And so I honor her too. Anyway, what I want to talk about tonight is kind of 3 categories and a little off the wall. But I figure I'm in Yakima, and this is kind of my hometown area. And so I kind of want to tell it like it is. And also, this will be videoed. I'd like to tell the country how I feel. You know, I got one shot. This is not dress rehearsal. I don't get to do my day or my life again. And so I want to tell it like it is tonight, perhaps more so than I ever have. So I'm going to be talking about political correctness, revisionist history, oh my God, revisionist history, elected official cowardice and corruption. I'm eager to get there. Washington State, poster child of all the states in the country, and some Supreme Court rulings. The one court in the country, most of them have been affected politically and are reachable by tribal money and politics. But the U.S. Supreme Court has been doing its darndest to help protect citizens, property rights, state sovereign authority. It's been coming out with some bang-up rulings that all of these state elected officials are just shining on. You know, so we'll get to that too. In lines of political correctness, the first thing that needs to be said, which nobody likes to hear, but it's absolutely true, and I know you'll understand this, being the folks you are, is that there's not a single word, there's no text in the United States Constitution. Our founders, the framers of this Constitution, even the Federalist Papers that provide background information on our Constitution, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that contemplates a separate non-republic form of governing system, that contemplates tribal governments within the republic forms of state governments. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution. All of federal Indian policy is unconstitutional. That's the bottom line. But it's early on, you know, we're a country that has learned by skinning its knees. We've done some good things and some bad things. And when we were settling the East and it was getting kind of busy, we started settling the West. And we came up with the Indian Removal Act to move all Indians west of the Mississippi. And I think in some of the decisions that we made regarding historic Indian policy, we made some poor decisions. We did the Cherokee Trail of Tears, nothing to be proud of. We made some poor decisions, and we're a country that really soaks up the guilt, you know. And then we've had help slathering on the false guilt for centuries. And so it's been easier to just go along with, get along with, oh, give them this, let's do that. And slowly this has just mushroomed to where we're at in 2019 is downright frightening. And I'll tell you the frightening part a little later on. We also had, here's a year to think about, 1855. That's the Yakima Treaty, you know, of 1855. That's most of your treaties, and your Stevens treaties in the Northwest were 1855. And there's a little perspective I'd like to lay out. If we remember our history, those of you who had it at school, which are probably over 70, the younger ones didn't, but where was our country in 1855? That was 5 years before the Civil War, in 1855. And Congress and presidents were saying for some years, go west, young man. Go west, young man. And sure enough, young man threw his stuff in his little wagon and went west. And Congress and federal agencies didn't give him 10 cents. They just said, go west, young man. If you find a piece of ground and you improve it for 5 years, it can be yours. And so a young man goes west. He finds that piece of ground. He improves it. Not only does he improve it, some of his neighbors come out and improve their ground. And then they build a school, and then a church, and then trading posts and stuff. And the next thing you know, we have Seattle, San Francisco. I mean, young man went west and settled the West and didn't receive 10 cents from the federal government for those efforts. All done with private entrepreneurship, very hard labor. Young man went west. Now in 1855, we were sectioning off large pieces of ground, similar to the Yakima Reservation here, and we were providing Native Americans land, blacksmiths, doctors, housing for their chiefs, annual money, commodities, food, every year. The Native Americans were receiving provisions, including their land and beneficial use and occupancy of their land and all the things that they were getting under their treaties in 1855. The Native Americans were receiving federal subsidies while a young man is receiving none and building this country. You know, that's 1855. Also in 1855, here in 1857, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. And that was the first book idea that went across the country that persuaded Americans that blacks were not animals, that they had souls, that they had pain, that they were humans. In 1857, that book came out, and of course we subsequently had the Civil War. But my point is, in 1855, we were treating our fellow black Americans like cattle, buying and selling them like cattle. So when you look at where was this country going in 1805 and who was getting the best deals, it wasn't the blacks. It wasn't really a young man going west either. The only one getting any resources of any kind were the Native Americans. And so I've never heard a thank you. I've never heard a, oh, don't bother anymore, we can take it from here. I've heard more. You stole our land. We were here first. You know, I've heard this biting the hand that feeds them, this disdain for the United States. It's in all the books for centuries. It's all over Indian country today, your major Indian websites. And then your tribal leaders will just never let you forget that we were here first. You stole our land. And that's what I call, and this is what you guys need to listen for. You listen for this at every level of your life. The yesterday stick. You know what I mean? They beat us up with a yesterday stick. You know? You stole our land. What the heck can I do about it now? I didn't steal your land. But they're going to thump. Because that's a constant winner and shame spreader. You know? So, that yesterday stick. I remember when I first got sober, when I was 33 years old. I'm working really hard to get my life back together and get my act together and being so good and not drinking no matter what. And then I'd run into some old friends and say, we knew you win. We knew you win. A yesterday stick. Or in a marital relationship situation, you know, maybe when somebody's been a little indiscreet and they all kind of get over it and the couple moves forward, another little scrap comes up. Remember that, you know? The yesterday stick. They're killer arguments. And they're go nowhere arguments, and there's no way to repair yesterday, you know? But America is about today, and it always has been about today. From the very forging of the revolution, you know, for the progress that we've always made, it's been, what are we doing today? What are we doing today? How are we going to move forward? We're having a huge struggle today, as you're all aware of. And we're in great peril, as you know. But in any event, getting back to some of the progress that has created this Indian industry, what I call the Indian industry, was those treaties of 1855 were to be 25 years. They were just temporary treaties, and they were based upon the fact that it would take 2 generations of Native Americans to assimilate and become full citizens, and they were really intended for 25 years. And proof of that, or confirmation of that, is that in 1871, Congress ended all treaty making. Just ended all treaty making. And then not long after that came the Dawes Act trying to remember the exact year of the Dawes Act, 1887. 1871, they end treaties. 1887, a few years later, is the Dawes Act, which was intended to end the reservation system and give every single tribal member a piece of land, ownership of that land, and he would become a citizen of his state as he accepted his Indian allotment. Once he accepted that Indian allotment, he was a citizen of his state. So the Dawes Act was opening up doing the next step for bringing Indians into full citizenship like all of us and ending the reservation system. That was 1887. And that opened up. That's why all of your reservations, with the possible exception of Navajo, all of your reservations are predominantly non-Indian. All of them are checkerboarded. All of them have the dual governing system, you know, because a few years after the Dawes Act was going on, there was a fellow named John Collier, an avowed communist, an author of communist books, who somehow became the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in the 1930s. And he somehow persuaded Congress that, you know, this assimilation, giving them land, that isn't working. They need to live communally. They need their tribal culture. And so, 1934, we get the Indian Reorganization Act. Reorganization Act saying, assimilation, the Dawes Act is dead, no more selling land to non-Indians. These tribal governments will have a constitution and will have their own tribal governing system, and they can live collectively on the land. The Indian the operative word being reorganize. The Reorganization Act of 34 was to reorganize the existing tribes in 1934. There were somewhere between 65 and 75 existing tribes in 1934. But as all things go with more, and as agencies and bureaucracy love to build their workforce and bloat their agencies, We now have 573 tribal governments. Can you imagine what kind of a staff that takes at the Bureau of Indian Affairs to bloat up that agency? We have 573 tribal governments, 500 of them that weren't acknowledged in 1934, and more tribes being recognized every year. The General Accounting Office, which is the big bean counter for the federal agencies, published a report in 2014 that listed 400 additional tribes waiting to be recognized. You know, folks are waking up here and there and saying, I think I was a tribe, you know, I think we were a tribe. Let's get on the list.
We're not even Indian.
Yeah, 573 existing tribes, 400 on a waiting list. And imagine the carrying capacity of our 48 states in the lower level. Imagine our carrying capacity. Washington State is the poster child for the impact of this. You can put 3 Washington State land bases into the state of Montana. Montana's huge. You can fit about 3 Washingtons in there. Washington State has 31 tribes. 31. Montana only has 7 in that huge land base. Washington State is entirely politically, financially, culturally, environmentally, everyly controlled by the tribes. And I'll explain why some of that is happening. And I'm not sure what some remedies are, but we're going to go for some. One of the things about we were here first, I just want to think about for a moment about those pilgrims that came over here in the 1600s. You stole our land. It's been genocide for the Indians. All this stuff you hear, it's all stuff. Those pilgrims, as I recall, they came in black cloth. They came, they did not have helmets, chain mail. They did not come here armed to arrive to conquer. They did not come here for that. They came here escaping religious tyranny. And they came here knowing not what to expect, just life was too insufferable in Europe. They came here to start a new life of their own. They came here with no hostile motives whatsoever. But they are portrayed as, oh, they came here to conquer this country and we were here first, you stole our land. Well, my answer to that, and I think this is important, is that during the 1600s we had the Magna Carta and the doctrine of discovery, and the rule of the day was, you know, he who got there, you know, wars. Countries were conquering each other right and left. And when they were conquering, they were decimating. Absolutely conquering and taking over whole peoples and whole countries. You know? So when a tribal member says, well, we were here first, I say, you should be really grateful that we were here second. Because had any other conqueror come, we'd be studying you like the dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Because that's the truth. That is the absolute truth. Had it been any other conqueror, had it been anyone but the folks escaping religious tyranny from Europe, we'd be studying the dinosaurs. So that's just my little heads up on how to respond to we were here first. And how to respond to you stole our land. Every single treaty was a sales contract between 2 governments. Every single treaty said, you're going to cede this land or we're going to pay you that much for it. Market rate of the times. Nobody stole anybody's lands. The treaties were sales contracts that purchased the lands. But you hear, oh, you stole our land. So that's another little thing that we have to dispel these things. In terms of fighting political correctness, you have to think things through and speak up. Just speak up. And one of the beautiful things about the recent presidential election is it's getting real okay to speak up. You know, the muzzles are coming off. They're just coming off. But it's my job, once my muzzle is off, to use it, to share what I know with my family, my friends, anybody that'll listen, because we have, I just need to put it at a personal level. I was the kid of a traveling insurance salesman, in the Northwest. I attended 7 schools in the 2nd grade, you know, all over the Northwest. And we settled down in Washington State and Spokane for a little while in my childhood. And then I came back up to Washington State for college. And then I came back up to Washington State to raise my kids on a little farm in the Spokane Valley. And then I came back up to Washington State to work for the city of Toppenish in 92. However, I married military. Dad was a traveling insurance, we kept on moving. I married military during the 2 Vietnam tours that we did and kept on moving. And then I got into my little party drinking shenanigans and we kept on moving. And the bottom line is I don't have a hometown. The bottom line is I personally don't even have a home state, you know? And I've always admired these folks that are 1st, 2nd, 3rd generations on their land, and they've all gone to the same school and have a family. I've admired the heck out of that kind of stability and endurance, and because my life was that of a rolling stone for many years. But then I went to my daughter. My daughter, once, apparently she's noticing that I'm getting old, and she asked me where I wanted to be buried. And I said, you know, I really don't know. And then I've been invited to speak in Massachusetts, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, a couple of years ago. And the host took me to see Plymouth Rock. And it's a little tiny rock, it's not a lot bigger than this podium, but it's a big monument area where you can look down. And I'm standing there looking at Plymouth Rock. Don't have a hometown, don't have a home state. And I just dissolved. Because it dawned on me, I have a home country. That's what I have, is I have a home country. And so when I got back from that trip, I said, Wendy, I want you to cremate me and scatter my remains on Plymouth Rock. Because I have a home country.
Yeah.
I have a home country. And that wakes me up every morning. Because our home country, my home country, I don't have another one to go to. My home country is under infiltration, spreading, and complete threat from the spread of tribalism coming from 2 factions. The spread of our domestic tribal governments and Native Americans, who are full citizens like you and I, have should have all the rights and benefits that you and I do, although they don't in their tribal government. And the other tribal factor infiltrating and coming on like gangbusters is the Islam and Sharia law and that stuff coming in. Neither one of those fit within the 4 corners of our Constitution. Neither one of those have any respect for our God-given Bill of Rights. Both of those cultures we appease. They're the only cultures we do appease. We appease the Muslim. We appease the Native Americans. And we've created monsters with that. And I mean that. And I mean that while at the same time I've lived on Indian reservations for 30 years. Most of my good friends are Indians. I love my fellow tribal families. I love them. They're very separate from and clueless about their own tribal governments that are keeping them in squalor, keeping them without. Well, they have these multi-million-dollar annual operating budgets, but the residents, the tribal members, if you've ever seen any tribal housing or been on any of the reservations, you wonder how in the devil and you have an annual operating budget of $573 million, and your folks are homeless on the reservation. What is wrong with this picture? Because they don't have free speech under their tribal constitutions, they don't have the Bill of Rights, they don't have anything. But the land is spreading, the tribal power is spreading. Here's some of the ways it's spreading. We have allowed tribal governments, and this was just before the Bush-Gore election, we have allowed tribal governments, the Federal Election Commission, to participate financially in our elections. Well, remember in 1988, they also got an exclusive monopoly on gaming, tax-exempt gaming. So not only are the taxpayers subsidizing all the basic needs, health, education, everything, courts, law enforcement, cultural resources, taxpayers are funding all the basic needs of these tribal governments, and the tax-exempt casino money is free money. And they are buying lobbyists, legal counsel, land, and they're buying legislators. And the reason they can buy legislators, hello Washington State, is because the Federal Election Commission, just before the Bush-Gore election of 2000, passed an advisory opinion for one tribe in New York that said that they were a government for purposes of governing and receiving federal subsidies, but they were a person for purposes of financially participating in elections. That opened the whole gaming industry, tribal gaming industry across the country to participate financially in elections. That pumped huge money into the Bush-Gore election and every single election since. Now, your county government, city government, state governments cannot participate financially in our American elections. But 573 tribal governments can and do. And so those are what I call the coin-operated elected officials in Olympia, in Helena, Montana, in Salem, Oregon. All these, there's 53 tribes in the Washington, Idaho, Oregon, and Montana. 53 tribes that pretty much run the governments of the state. They control the governor's offices, the attorney general's offices, your legislators. It's the money. And once a guy or gal is put in, she better do their bidding, or they'll take her out and run somebody else in. And so it's just growing incrementally. And there's not a single thing that county governments, private citizens, we can't make the changes, because those benefiting from the changes are the ones that need to make it, and they're not about to. So that's one of the biggest tools that is spreading this tribalism across lands in each of our states. Another thing that happens is there's some, I don't know what we've done with our logic, but years ago in Washington State, and it's happened subsequently, and it's happening to take down the Klamath Dams in Oregon right now, and it's happening in Northern California, it's happening wherever there's reservations and creeks and streams and fishies, you know. All of a sudden we are supposed to believe that one ethnicity owns a species. One ethnicity owns the salmon, owns the Chinook. No other ethnicity. That just fails logic. But that's the political power and the emotional power that tribes have. And they've taken it a little step further, because they own the fishies as their sacred species. Well, the fishies need water, so they own the waters, or they claim the waters. And almost all of your Washington State rivers are under the management and administration and control of the 31 tribes. Now, what's wrong with this picture? In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously, 9-0, written by the most liberal judge, Justice Kagan, ruled in 2013, 9-0, that states have the absolute right and authority and ownership of all navigable waters in their state. You know, that hasn't mattered a bit, because in 2013 we were under a different administration who ignored all Supreme Court laws, and by 2013 the tribal money and political power was so huge that who cares about the Supreme Court? You know, so it's been ignored. But it's fundamental to statehood, absolutely fundamental to state. When the lands were ceded to the state, the waters attached to the land were ceded to the state as well. But that's all been revisionist history, chased away. And apparently, here in 2019, just into March, into last month, the Supreme Court came out once again, this was in an Alaska case, that says, because the federal government has been, there's a lot of federal lands in our western states that were never rightfully disposed to the states, and the federal overreaching under the previous administration, I won't even say that guy's name, but under the 8 years of the previous administration, the western states were under absolute attack. The real goal was crop production and food production. And the real tools for getting rid of those things were capturing water, spreading tribal authority, and pulling off the grazing rights, BLM. You know the Bundy and Hammond stories. You know what's gone on with the Bureau of Land Management, with the Bureau of Reclamation, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And the whole game was food production. They used the Endangered Species Act to wipe out the San Joaquin Valley in Central California. That was 20% of our food. And so the western states have taken a severe hit with the combination of the federal government overreaching and using tools such as the Endangered Species Act, tribal governments, whatever is necessary to knock that out. We're in the process of repair, but it's going to be slow. There's some terms that just upset me no end, and I want you to understand how I feel about that. One is Aboriginal rights. These are the lands of our ancestors. These are our sacred lands. Just recently, last week I think it was, when Notre Dame burned and the whole world was grieving at the loss of an almost 900-year worship center. That burned for 12 hours. 2 days later, your Indian industry, media, were saying, gee, it's a shame that Notre Dame burned. But maybe now you understand how we feel about our sacred lands and your pipelines. This is an ethnicity that cares nothing about any other ethnicity or religion or anything else, but demands respect, demands finances, resources, demands. I was raised, even though my folks weren't about much, I was raised to know that respect is earned. Respect is absolutely earned. It is not donated or paid for. But that's what we're doing with the federal Indian policy. We're donating respect that is demanded. And this is my fellow American. And there's something terribly wrong with this picture. And then another beauty, which is dead wrong and needs to be confronted out loud when you hear it, is this time immemorial. Don't you love that one? Time immemorial. We've been here since time immemorial. Well, time immemorial has a clock on it for the United States government. Time immemorial ended on September 17, 1787, when the United States Constitution was adopted. That's when the clock starts on the United States of America. And anything pre-constitutional or extra-constitutional, Aboriginal lands, time immemorial, tra-la, is unconstitutional. It's a lie, Philip told me something And he had to pound it into me for 6 months before I would accept it. But he said, Elaine, and he's only referring to the Indian tribal leaderships, the legal professions, the Indian media, the lobbyists that are in there for Congress to get more, those folks, the tribal chairmen and government officials, not the tribal families. He said, Elaine, if you think for 1 minute that they think like you think, you will always lose. And I thought, that sounds extremely racist, but I was hearing it from an Indian. But it sounded, and I couldn't accept it. And then he told me, and you can read this in your history, that in the conflicts between cavalry and the Indians, or settlers and the Indians, because there was blood on both hands on both sides, he told me that the young warriors who were able to steal from the white man or lie to the white man or get anything from the white man was promoted in authority in his tribe. Stealing and lying was rewarded. Now, I was raised a different way. I didn't dare to steal or lie. It was shamed. And that's strikingly similar to something else that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. The Islam, taqiyya, lying to achieve is rewarded. These cultures that are communal and collectivism and tribalism in their core both have that in common. Lying is rewarded. And yet here we are, little John Q. Public, raised in the red, white, and blue, to always tell the truth, like George Washington when he chopped down the cherry tree. You know, we don't think like that. And we're extremely vulnerable to that. Extremely vulnerable. And it's getting worse and worse. The reason I want to connect those two dots is because not only was the previous administration going after the western states, expanding federal land and water control, knocking out food and crop production, promoting sanctuary cities, there's 160 of them now, and bringing in immigrants by the bazillions from Middle Eastern countries. Not only was all that going on, he got Congress to pass two things. One was in 2012, it's called the Indian Energy Policy Act. And the Indian Energy Policy Act was when Obama decided that America's power grid and energy would be really good economic development for the tribal governments, who have no duty to you or me or the customer base, and who are immune from suit if anything goes wrong. But he thought Indian Energy Policy Act, what a swell plan, and now he put out billions, Congress put out billions for tribes to acquire major power facilities. I live on the Flathead. The Salish Kootenai has acquired the Kerr Dam, which is a major black start dam along the Columbia River. Meaning, if dams go out in sequence, that Kerr Dam can start up and generate additional dams. It's a strategic dam that is now controlled by a tribal government that has no duty to its customers. And all the revenue and all that stuff, in addition to the tax-exempt gaming, is going to the tribe and not the customer base. So that's the Indian Policy Act. Now, think of that. Back in 1904, here's where it ties together in a frightening way. Back in 1904, there was a Secretary of Interior, Albert B. Fall. Albert B. Fall was a New Mexico corrupt guy, Secretary of Interior, and the Western states are shiny, brand new, just kind of coming along, and they needed help from the feds. So Albert B. Fall put out a directive that all power and water systems in the western states were to be located on or near Indian reservations. That was a directive. Now think of your map of the country and think of Grand Coulee Dam and Hoover Dam and Kerr Dam and all your dams. They're on or near Indian reservation, which was cool in 1904 because the states were young and forming up. We needed to get water and irrigation to the western lands, arid lands. And we needed that. Now fast forward to 2014, and in 2014, Congress passes the HEARTH Act, H-E-A-R-T-H, Health Education, big omnibus funding bill for all the tribes. Tucked in it, Congress, persuaded by the administration, previous administration, realized that, gosh, you know, our Native Americans have a lot in common with our Middle Eastern cultures. And tucked within that HEARTH Act is the ability of tribal governments to long-term lease for up to 75 years their federal Indian trust land that has no state or county or localized. Their federal Indian trust land can be leased to Middle Eastern countries for economic development for up to 75 years. So, when you think the country's power grid in the western states is adjacent to the Indian reservations, and they're now doing economic development with Middle Eastern countries, you can add 348 risky areas to those 160 sanctuary cities. And this country is polka dotted with trouble. And the common denominators are collectivism, tribalism, and takia, that kind of thing. And as I said, this does not reflect upon the tribal families and the friends I've lived with and made along on 25 years on 3 reservations. This is the industry that's a big money maker and power maker to take down the country. And if we don't speak up, which we've been terrified to do, it won't be long. So what I want to encourage people to do is to drop the guilt.
Yeah.
Drop the guilt, the false guilt. Who cares who was here first? We're all here today, we're all Americans. Push back on the lies, you know? I think every person who's owned land considers it sacred. This land is not sacred Native American land alone. But when you listen to that and buy that and say, oh, they're just, you know, you don't pay any attention to them, you better. You really better. And you better say, hey, as a property owner, as a landowner, as a farmer, as a condo owner, my land is sacred to me too. And ethnicity has nothing to do with it. You can remind people that respect is earned. If somebody wants my respect, they better earn it. If I want your respect, I better earn it. And the other thing is, you know the old classic sticks and stones? I've been called so many ugly names, you know? And generally, that'll shut anybody down. Somebody call me a bigot or a racist for the first time, I think, crap, I'm not either. But what do I say? Do people really think that? You have to get past that, because that's your muzzle. The moment you're called a name, say, thank you very much, I must be making a difference. You know, you call me a racist, it tells me you got nothing between your ears to argue with me about. Call me any name you want, because I know who I am. And you know who you are. And we are not racist, and we are not bigots, and we're not Nazis, and we're not any of these crap names being thrown at us. But we tend to shower. So the things we have to do with our family and friends and whoever is just practice. Practice with somebody local. Practice allowing yourself to be called a name and push it back. You know? Practice saying, my land is sacred to me too, thank you very much. You know? Practice saying, respect is earned. Period. Yes?
Why would your rank and file tribal members choose to be ruled by an oligarchy when they're a United States citizen and they're guaranteed a Republican form of government? Why do you suppose they put up with this?
Thank you, because you helped me add another piece to the puzzle. 4 out of 5 American Indians left the reservation long ago. They do not live on the reservations. 1 out of 5 are still there. And those that are there raised multi-generations from birth to fear the white man, to hate the white man, that this is, if you leave the reservation, you're not an Indian anymore. Those kind of stories are passed one generation to another. So the ones that are there know no other lifestyle, and I think they're afraid to step away and assume their rights and join the rest. Not only that, they're given enough to survive, to sustain, because the tribal governments need a population. They do that. Now, one of the things that's really affecting that population right now is the Indian Child Welfare Act. Congress, you know, the lobbyists went in for the tribes, the Congress said, oh, our people, non-Indians are adopting our children, we're losing our culture. Congress gives them the Indian Child Welfare Act, which transferred the parental power of tribal members to the tribal government. Enrolled tribal members have no parental power over their children. Tribal governments have the legal authority over every enrollable tribal member under 18 years and under. Congress did that. And that is used as a recruitment tool, but that is also used as a weapon. You know, some tribal member stands up and disagrees with his tribal government, he can get a knock on the door 2 or 3 days later, you're a bad parent, we're taking your child. And they're gone for a while till the family shapes up. That has happened. I'm working with 10 families right now on the one reservation where that has been one of the worst acts that Congress ever put in. To transfer the parental rights of United States citizens to a non-republic form of government entity is insidious. It's about to get taken apart at the Supreme Court. Texas, God bless Texas. Texas only has one little tribe. They ruled the Indian Child Welfare Act unconstitutional, and they went right down the line on how unconstitutional it is. And that case is wending its way up to the Supreme Court, and I think the Indian Child Welfare Act is going to go down. But then you have to get these states and whatnots to implement it. The U.S. Supreme Court has made marvelous rules for the state of Washington, for all of us. But then you have to get these governors, state legislators, to implement, because the Supreme Court doesn't have an enforcement authority. You know, but they've given us the tools. They've done their best to turn this around the last 15 years or so, and now we have an even more conservative court. It's going to get better and better. So, anyway, any other questions?
Do you have any comment on this latest Supreme Court ruling regarding fuel taxes and the Yakima Indian reservations?
I remember when that was, that's been an off and on issue for years. I was in Toppenish from 92 to 2007, and it comes and goes. The fundamental problem I have is that, and I didn't clarify this when I was talking earlier, so thanks for the question. They're basing it on the treaties, the Yakima Treaty. The Yakima tribe was one of the last tribes to sign up to become an Indian Reorganization Act tribe. It kept its treaty in place until 1955. Now, when a tribe applies to be an Indian Reorganization Act tribe and adopt a tribal constitution that promises to follow our constitution but never does, they can choose to become an Indian Reorganization Act tribe or remain a treaty tribe. What has happened with your fun revisionist history is these tribes that walked away from their treaties in order to get more subsidies and more governing authority as Indian Reorganization Act tribes, they've all sort of suddenly remembered their treaties since their gaming money got big. And they can hire these lawyers that'll prostitute themselves and the law, you know. So in terms of the fuel tax, it's bogus because the treaty is dead. The tribe became an Indian Reorganization Act tribe somewhere in the 1955 or so. It was slow to come on board. It really did value its treaty. And these treaties all have historical, significance, and they should be honored as part of America's history, but they have no legal force and effect, except what has been acquired through power, politics, money, and phony, outrageous judicial rulings from sleazebag attorneys where the money's huge. The money's huge in litigiously suing that the tribes do. I know that when we were in Washington, it's the same way now in Montana, and it's also that way in Oregon. If a community is getting pushed and needs to defend itself or hold on to its municipal authority against the tribe, or if a citizen property owner is getting bullied by a tribal government, you can't find an attorney in the state in Washington that'll take the case. They have to go out of state. That happened to us in Toppenish frequently. The money is, the 31 tribes place all their best cases against, with all those big law firms in the state. And they all say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, we have a conflict of interest. We have so they smother the legal industry in the state who will do anything for money. And then the private town or county or whoever has to find somebody out of state, and then they're not part of that good old boy system in the state. So it's been very tough to fight this stuff. So I don't know if that answered your question, but anyway.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Because I don't know how aware you are of a couple of things in Washington. I know you're aware that they used to be able to, the Indians don't pay any excise tax on the cars, and they were delivered there.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
longer
yeah.
do they have to be delivered there. They cannot pay excise tax on the cars and go pick them up on the lot.
Oh, they can now?
That's what Phil told me, so I'm going
Wow.
with it. And the other thing is, the Yakima tribe makes their own license plates.
Yeah.
But they are allowed to live in Yakima or anywhere else and use
Yeah.
the roads off of the reservation, which is a big
Yeah.
no-no, just like if anyone
Yeah.
came up and lived here from Oregon or any
Yeah.
other state, a big no-no. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's part of the whole package.
Well, and the reason it got here, here's something else, Sandy, you just reminded me of. Tribal governments do not make these decisions. Tribal governments cannot make any real significant decisions. They are decisions that are made by your state legislators and elected officials that have to co-sign or bless those decisions. The Yakima tribe could not just make those license plates.
Well, they've been told
Great work.
that what the police officers, state patrol, whatever, were
Yeah.
told to stand down and let them go.
Right.
And I don't know there's anything in writing about that.
It's just de
I
facto,
just don't-
default.
I have never seen anything in writing,
Yeah.
but, And the other
Yeah.
thing is, I think because this is kind of a big deal in Washington now, people may not even know it's a big deal, but they're gonna come across it sooner or later. Can you please explain the Centennial Accord?
Oh, well, thank you. It's on my notes and I blew past it. And then I can talk about the four horses patoots too,
Yeah.
Beginning with Governor Lowry in 1989. Remember 1988, 1 year earlier, was the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and Lowry saw the money coming. 1989 is the 100th anniversary of the state of Washington. So he passes this big Centennial Accord very ceremoniously, and within that accord, he recognizes a trust relationship between the state of Washington and its Indian tribes. Now, the federal government has a trust relationship with the Indian tribes. No states do, or should. But Lowry, in the accord, creates this trust relationship between the state. And he opens up a desk and agency in every state agency to coordinate and collaborate with all the 31 tribes. He was so proud of that, he took it to President Bill Clinton, who just thought it was a marvelous idea, and created Executive Order 13175, which put an Indian desk in every federal agency, 29 of them. So prior to Lowry's Centennial Accord and then Clinton's executive order, funds were coming to the Indian tribes from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and a little bit from the health services. Since that accord and the executive order, all 29 agencies have to factor in the needs of all 573 tribes every year. So now we have these phony things like the Indian Roads Program, Reservation Roads Program, and all these new programs, throwing all these more dollars out to these tribes. So Lowry put it into place, and then it was Governor Locke, I believe, and then Greg War, and then that idiot you got in place now. Isn't he something? I mean, he's just really something.
Don't want to box the rocks, but his wife's sharp in town.
That's what I hear. His wife is his brains, and he's all about climate change. God love him. You know, he couldn't. Well, I have to be careful. I guess I don't want to say what I really think of him, but we've got some of the poorest excuses for elected officials, and it's our fault. Who's going to the polls and or marking the ballots for idiots like that? Too many of us are. Too many of us are. And one of the things that we need to all explore, because it affects every aspect of our country and our life, is what is it? The school system? We don't have another country. We either hang on to this one, or we're going belly up like Venezuela. We either find a way to hang on, and we're all raised to be so polite and nonviolent and tolerant, and it's killing us, you know, because the people that are overpowering us are not polite, they're not tolerant,
And they lie.
you know, and we're no match for that unless we grow in numbers and get at least verbally noisy and in writing noisy. For any of you that like to write letters to the editor, well, even our mainstream media, it's very hard. We have to go to social media to get, and wonderful websites like what Laura Lee's doing to get our information out. We're getting smothered. We're the boiling frog. We're parboiling right now. And we either keep this president in the 2020 election, or, I mean, I just don't have another country. I don't know where I'd go. Do you? Where would you go? And I have great-grandchildren now. And so I wake up every morning and get into this and get noisy about this. And I'm at an age and stage in my life where I can get away with it too, you know. And so I don't like to crochet or embroidery or go shopping with the girls or play cards, you know. I'm not a tourist. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is what I can do when I don't have a hometown or a home state, but I have a home country. That's what I can do. So, anything else? Any other questions? I'm all up for it.
I
Yeah.
have a question. That's something I just don't understand is the legal authority when there are crimes on reservation.
Mhm.
It seems like, or even just little things, if you're
Mhm.
driving through,
Mhm.
what are the jurisdictions and how is that handled? It seems like a mess.
It is a mess, but it's pretty simple and a great question. Number one, tribal governments, tribal police have no authority over non-tribal persons.
Unless.
And wait a minute. When you're driving on the public roads, through the states, through the reservations, you're on public roads, and you're a non-tribal person. They can, if there is a mutual agreement, what's that called?
Well, they call it.
Cross-deputization.
But that's
Yeah.
a false statement, because we're not
Yeah.
crossing over anything.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
just being deputized.
But they can do what is called, it's not very effective, but they can do cross-deputization, which means a tribal member, if you were speeding within the reservation boundaries, could pull you over and detain you until he calls an officer of your government. But by the time the officer of your government gets there, you're not speeding, he doesn't have, you know what I mean? So, now, there's also the Major Crimes Act, 5 major crimes, where the FBI and the federal government has authority over murder and rape and robbery and whatever the other 5 major crimes act are. But your governing authority on this reservation, and most of them, is your county sheriff, your chiefs of police. For all non-tribal members, that's who it is. And likewise, they don't have authority over tribal members. They can do not much more than detain and turn them over to their tribal government. So it's kind of clear but it seems murky. And here's the other thing that gets to us. All of us, I got a call from a fellow in Michigan a month or so ago, and he'd been falsely accused of something in a Michigan casino. And he's just scared to death. He said, they held me and they did this and they want me to come into tribal court and I don't know anything about this. You know what I mean? And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, I said, number one, you do not walk into that tribal court. They have no authority over you. Don't you step your body into a tribal court. You know?
You don't even have, the Indians, they don't even have an appeal.
Yeah, but we think, because we're raised to respect authority, and we certainly respect uniforms, even a casino security guard, we're raised to respect authority. And so some guy who's just having a good time at a casino and he gets sideways with a security guard, you know, all of a sudden he's just terrified. And he wants to do whatever the tribal court wants him to do. So you do nothing, you get a, you know, and I gave him a reference to an attorney, and so he's all good with it now. But who knows? When we're in casinos, number one, you have no, if you slip and fall or something happens, you're mugged or your car's trashed in the parking lot, you have no recourse.
Or if you get poisoned by their food.
Or you get, yeah, they have no health inspection. You have no recourse. You're on your own in these tribal casinos or in any tribal properties as a non-Indian. None. And that's important to remember. That doesn't keep the people out. And here's the other goofy thing. We're funding our own demise. You know what I mean? We're the fools going into the casinos. I'm guilty too.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was the Las Vegas casino, it wasn't tribal. We're funding, we go into these tribal casinos, we put our dollars in, you know. Oh, here's some more to take over. Here's some more to take out our state. Here's some more to take the land off the tax rolls of our state. We fund our own demise and call it recreation. Because we don't know what the bottom line is. And we're all about having a good time. So it's a couple dollars in a casino, in a tribal casino, so what? Well, that's about a $30-40 billion annual industry that's buying a whole lot of land in this country, and a whole lot of attorneys, and a whole lot of legislators. You know, that's a bunch of money buying our demise. So it's...
Can I answer a little bit more about the
Sure.
authority on?
Yeah.
Okay, I love to go up there and poke them in the eye. I have more fun doing that. One, that interview where they say you can't come in, yes you can. They don't get to control federal roads, they just think they do. And I've been pulled over by them often, and poked around by them often, and threatened by them often, and I just stand still and I say, you call the sheriff's department, you have no authority over me, I will not even show them my driver's license because you are not required to. And it
Good
is,
to know.
it is, I absolutely, and Phil taught me well on this, and
Yeah.
we played with it and practiced it and had a good time with it. But it is a matter of, no, I will not give you my license, but when you call someone who represents my country, or me, preferably the sheriff, they can call a state or two if they want to, but preferably the sheriff, and they're good here in our county.
Yeah.
Then I will show it to them. And we at our greatest, we had 3 of them behind us with sirens and lights, and then finally the sheriffs got there because they were on shift change. We actually had one of them behind his door. Step out of the car. Brian, I said, just ignore him. We'll just take a nap here till our country, our people come and take care of it. And they literally gave me the form because I'm Phil Ferndale's wife. And they said, you know,
Yeah.
and let me
Yeah.
fill out the report. That's how fed up they are with the crap.
Yeah,
I filled out the report, not the sheriff's department. But you don't even have to show them your ID. You can stand on that, they can't do a doggone thing about it, nothing.
there is an investigation underway now that involves and includes the missing Indigenous women, but it also involves lots of other missing women, not just Indigenous. And the day is going to come in the next 6 months or so when we'll be able to talk freely about what the components are of this human trafficking and sex trafficking, pedophilia, and there's no coincidence in the sudden rise of full-term abortions over the last couple of years. Remember when we thought the Roe versus Wade in first trimester was a concern? And in the last few years, oh my goodness, it's just cool, full term in the consumer demands of baby parts. All of this is an underbelly of the country that's under investigation right now. And it isn't just the indigenous women that are victims here that just go missing, it's many other women. And it's finally getting a deep look. And it's another little part of our country that is dark and ugly. But then, you know, we're all human beings and we have good and evil between our ears. Anyway, I can't say any more about that, but there is some investigation going on now.
There have been some pretty good roundups lately.
Yeah.
Sizable.
Yeah. Yeah, there are federal investigators taking very serious looks at these under this administration. You know, not the previous, not even close on previous. Yeah.
Because somebody cares.
Am I gonna get in trouble early?
No, but that is an international issue.
Yes, it is
I
international.
wouldn't blame it on our country.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
thank you
it
for that.
crosses
Yeah.
many borders.
Yeah, that makes me feel better, not just our country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, wait.
You touched on this earlier, but what do you say to like the farmers, ranchers, businessmen on the reservation that are non-tribal members that frankly they feel like their rights as American citizens are more and more deprived all the time? And I think the response is, well, you can just pack up and leave.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was just wondering if you comment on that phenomenon.
Well,
Deeded land or the leased land?
Well, either way,
Either way.
even if they outright own their
Yeah,
land,
yeah.
or if they're
Yeah.
leasing land.
I'll give you the Yakima reservation experience, and I'll give you the Flathead reservation where I live right now, outside of Roman. Years ago on the Yakima reservation, it was always a very high Hispanic seasonal and settled workers population, and the school kids were Hispanic and Native and Anglo and Philippine, I think. Anyway, wonderful live and let live. They all went to school together, all played on the ball teams together, they all grew up together, and worked on the farms together, you know? And that's the way it pretty much was until the Yakima tribe, late in the game, but the Yakima tribe got its casino. And all of a sudden, we're waking up to a very different kind of neighbor. They want to ban alcohol. It was several other things. Want to take over some dams. We stopped them to get over the priest and Wanapum Dam. We just woke up to a different. The wealthier they get, the more the bullying of the local municipalities occurs, and good friends lived together on neighboring farms for years started falling away. Over on the Flathead Reservation, again, in the previous administration, the game was to knock out the farmers and the food and the crops, and using the tribes to do that with. Over there, they have a water compact where they really want to, where the tribe will have control of all the irrigation water, and the tribe will administer the irrigation projects, kind of like the Wapato irrigation project out here, only worse. And what's interesting is the history of the Salish Kootenai tribes, which are the tribes on the Flathead where I live. The history of those tribes, that they migrated really originally over from Washington State, landed there in Flathead Lake area, and they were nearly decimated by the Blackfeet tribe just north of them. There were big battles over bison and territory. They just were nearly decimated by the Blackfeet tribe. About the time the Homestead Act and the Go West Young Man is happening and the farmers are coming out. And so, in those early 1850s, 60s, and 70s, when the Blackfeet were on an assault, and so were some southern Paiute tribes after the Salish Kootenai, it was the farmers that armed the Salish Kootenai and fought with them and saved them, and then taught them some basic agriculture and got them into a sustainable population and a safer reservation. You know? And the source of that information is a couple of elder women, and the books that I read that from came from the Salish Kootenai Community College, talking about their history from the elders' point of view. Now, that was then, and this is now, and they're saying the same thing you just said. Well, you can always pack up and get out of here. You know, respect is earned.
Taking water.
Yeah, yeah,
They are taking water.
yeah, and they're just following the lead of what, you know, of those that are going after our crop production. And this also ties in with what Laura Lee mentioned. There's international influences here. The tribes in this country very much are solicitous. They really want the United Nations to recognize them as independent governments. They're very much tied in with the United Nations, Agenda 2030, all the environmental NGOs, and they use it fish and wildlife. This is a new pet peeve of mine. It's what I call the four-legged drones. We have what we call an apex predator, like the grizzly, like the elk, the bison, the cougars, wolves, apex predators that don't have really other predators. And all of a sudden, fish and wildlife and tribal governments just can't do enough for the grizzlies and the wolves. There's 17,000 elks, 17,000 elk in Skagit County, over by Cedro Woolley and Bellingham, urban area. 17,000 elk, the tribes that are running loose over there. These predator animals that are getting given sanctuary and being managed for their population and whatnot are used to really discourage, deter, and drive off the human population. We got a thing going on in Montana called the American Prairie Reserve. 3.5 million acres that's being restored. We're gonna knock out about 5 towns, all the crops and farms, and it's being restored to its natural prairie status 150 years ago for the purpose of having 30,000 bison being able to roam free without fencing over their prairie reserve like they did 150 years ago. What for? You know? It's part, and that's all this environmental groups, your animal rights groups, fish and wildlife, America Agenda 21 and 2030. Those are all these forces coming at this only country we have. And they're all kind of connected. And the tribal governments are just nice locations where they can implement this stuff, the reservations. Good, you know, just like your sanctuary cities, nice little locations. Yeah, well, let me just get the Laura.
Well, if I could just go a little bit deeper and elaborate on what you just said. It is interconnected, and I think it is called the New World Order.
Yeah.
And I know that you know this, and I hope you guys realize this. The tribes are being used.
Yes.
They're pawns in this game also, as are we.
Yeah.
But they're a great pawn because they're organized, they're being played like violins at the top, not the little guys. And so that's another way that we're losing our land and we're losing our water rights and et cetera, as we are through the BLM and the Forest Service and the UN. And, you know, if you step back and look at the whole big picture, there's quite an agenda going on. And that's why we need to get noisy and stand up and protect, as she said, this is the only country we have.
And standing up works. I remember when Sandy and I and Phil went up on the reservation to visit some land that he has up there. They called the cops on us. Phil didn't back down a bit. And by the time the conversation was over, they all left. Phil just stood up and said, "You don't have any authority to tell me anything. I own this land. I have a right to access my land anytime I want to. and they backed down and left. But he was the kind of a guy that could tell them where the bear crapped in the buckwheat.
Yeah. The problem of our K-12 curriculums, I saw something about Washington State. There's an article out about the mandated Native American history in K-12 curriculum in Washington State. We were here first. They were here first. We stole their land. And white people are bad. White supremacists. Everything that goes against the respectable American citizen, the property owner, our Constitution, our country, it is irrelevant. Because there's only one ethnicity that matters. And that's getting pounded into the K-12 curriculum here. And so it makes younger generations, you know, less willing to defend something they're told is so bad. What is your name again?
What?
Oh, I'm going to ask you what your name is.
Steve,
Steve, what's your
here several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, the Yakimas took it upon themselves to deliver paperwork to all of the businesses on Yakima Reservation.
I remember that.
The
tribal
farms and
the tribal
everything.
employment rights ordinance.
Yep.
wasn't it? Yep.
And they wanted, if you wanted to do business,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
needed a license, and I
Yeah.
think it was like $125 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's egregious enough, but if you read the last paragraph, right above where you signed
Yeah.
this agreement, you ceded control
Exactly.
of your business or your farm or whatever to tribal
Yeah.
governance.
Wow.
Thank you for that reminder, because that's one of the things the stand-up committee went after. And we told every business owner in town, do not
Yeah, and I had
sign
people
that.
that I was working for
Yeah.
on the reservation, they said, what do we do with this? I said, just tear it up and throw it away,
Yeah,
because you don't
yeah.
ever want to sign
Exactly.
that piece of paper
Thank you.
because your property is gone.
Bless your heart, Steve. That's a very important point. Don't ever put your signature on a tribal document. Don't ever walk into a tribal courtroom. If you walk in, you've consented to be governed. If you sign anything, you've consented to be governed. And then you have to start all your legal process in their courts, which are just kangaroo. And that's years before you get things squared away, if ever. Joe just reminded me of a fun thing that happened to us when I first moved to Wisconsin in 2008 to be the village's community development director and tribal affairs director. My husband and I, along with some other officials, attended a big Oneida, get to know the Oneidas. They were doing a big, splashy, come get to know the Oneidas, and I'm new to Wisconsin, I don't know any, but anyway, we go to this meeting. My husband is Shoshone Indian. We're listening to this whole little dog and pony song, and then they open it up for questions. Of course, you could ask the questions, and they never give you an answer, but they opened it up for questions. And my husband, now mind you, I'm kind of new to the community, my husband stands up, who rarely goes anywhere with me or speaks out, and there's probably a good reason for that. He stood up and he said, I don't understand one thing. You folks say you hate the white man, you don't trust the white man, he stole your land, and then you go out and pay top dollar, market dollar for premier property, and then you just hand it over free to the United States in title. He says, why do you do that? And the whole room just roared. And I thought, oh, good on him. But then I was kind of new in town. I thought, oh, how's this going to go? You know what I mean? But they do. You talk about skitsy. I mean, no trust for the white man, no respect for the white man. By God, the white man stole his land. And so let's go buy this very expensive property and give it to the United States. This joke's on who? Congress, you know, Congress can end Indian policy anytime it wants. And nearly has on a couple of occasions in the past. And so I would think if I were a tribal leader, I wouldn't be just handing that valuable land off free just for the tax break when I may never get it back and won't. Or you know what I mean? It's really hypocritical or crazy or something. Anyway, any other questions? How are we doing on time?
I don't know. I haven't heard anybody say they want to
Oh,
leave.
somebody over here.
8:39.
Couple comments, actually.
Yes.
It seems like with all the talk about Russian collusion in our elections, maybe we should bring up some facts about tribal collusion in our elections. They're not our government, but
No,
they're
they're not.
influencing our government.
Yes.
And Elaine, are they still allowed, and I know they were working on a change on that, but remember that Feinstein, McCain, blah, 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 where they didn't even have to,
Oh, they were eliminated.
that, where they didn't have
Yeah.
to even say
Yeah.
what they gave to candidates?
Right.
Is that been changed?
They still don't. On their financial contributions, they don't have any reporting requirements. The recipient of the money does, but if the money's just cash in a little brown bag, does he or she? Their reporting requirements are substantially less than ours. And that's a really good point, because they are separate governments that are not Republican form
That'd be fun.
and that are dramatically impacting our federal level of elected officials, state level, county level.
That kind of ties into my next comment.
Yeah.
A government has certain responsibilities, certain functions, customer service, managing of the infrastructure. They don't seem to do any of that.
No,
And if you look at the mafia, where was their power base coming from? Gambling.
yeah,
So I think a RICO investigation maybe needs to be done on some of these tribes and say,
Oh.
hey, are you a government or not?
oh, I've looked at that, Philip and I have looked at that, and that is so true. If you really look at the collusion going on, the money,
Organized
and the
crime.
legislators, and it is kind of a sad thing, and I don't think tribal families understand it, or even tribal leaders understand or care, that we have given reservations advantages with gambling, with addictions, with devastating things, and very disruptive stuff to the tribal family. We've kind of fomented and set up services that disrepair the families and disunify the families.
Now,
Go ahead.
I don't remember the case, but it seems to me that if a tribe has a business that is more than 50% non-tribal members working there, or more than 50% non-tribal members gambling there, oh, did I say gambling there?
Yeah.
Gambling there, then they can be audited.
I don't,
Oh,
I
he's
don't
adamant
know
on
about
that.
that.
He's gone over, he pulled that case out and he talked about that over
Yeah.
and over again, that they can be audited because they're more non-tribal than tribal, so they'd be audited like any other business.
that would be great.
Like that's gonna happen in Washington. but-
You can audit any in the casinos, because hell, there ain't no that many Indians in there.
That's
Yeah.
right, that, I mean, it was a perfect
Yeah.
example.
But there's not that many Indians working in the casino either. There's a lot of Spanish people,
No.
and they say that, there could be, think that they could be.
Maybe they speak
But they're-
Spanish.
But they can hire all they want, but if it's non-tribal, more than 50%.
Yeah.
There is, I wish I would know
Yeah.
what that case is, but.
I can tell you that one of the former secretary, Ryan Zinke, who was disparaged hugely by the tribal voices, when he was a congressman in Montana, we considered him owned by the tribes. He becomes Secretary of Interior, and we're thinking, oh boy, here we go, it's gonna get worse. He changed hats, and he made some very big changes that really upset the tribes, and one of them was that there are 8 regional BIA offices all over the country, and tribes could take their property that they just acquired on the market and take it to the BIA regional office and have it placed into trust right then and there. And tribal land, taxable lands were coming off the tax rolls in all the western states rapidly from just getting it done at the regional office. Zinke said, no. You process it through the regional office, but every one of them has to be reviewed and signed off by the Secretary of Interior, me, or his assistant, delegated authority. That totally put the brakes on land coming off our tax base. It slowed it up considerably. Big backlog now. And so what have they done? Now the new buzzword, these are the legal eagles and lobbyists and whatnot. Now, if we walk there, it's Indian country. Doesn't matter if it's taxable land in Washington State. If it's within our reservation boundary, or our ancestors walked there, it's Indian country. And they've bloated up and expanded this definition of Indian country, so it doesn't matter if the land's in trust or tax exempt or not. They're rushing out this word Indian. Okay, so fast forward, I worked for Hobart for 10 years. Beautiful little community. And the Oneida tribe there has a event, the Apple Fest, once a year, and it's really great. Well attended, 4,000, 5,000 people come in for the Apple Fest. And it's held on partly trust land and partly fee land. And always years before, the tribes and the tribal police and our Hobart police and county sheriffs all work together to manage traffic and crowds and, you know. And Hobart requires a $100 permit fee for special events with over 1,000 people. Well, they got a new tribal chairman that said, nah, we're not paying $100 to Hobart. This is Indian country. Hobart has no authority here, you know? So they refused to get this $100 permit. Our chief of police issues him a little citation for $5,000 for refusing to get the permit. The tribe sues Hobart. Now this is over a $100 permit. Sues them in federal district court. Hobart can afford one municipal attorney. They have me on retainer to work with them, but one municipal attorney. And the tribe has a big, huge legal department and hired 3 Washington, D.C. law firms to file suit in federal court. And so the oral argument was last fall, and there's our municipal attorney, 3 Washington, D.C. law firms and the tribe's legal counsel, and they're all saying, it's Indian country. It's our old treaty of 1838. Well, the tribe wasn't even recognized till 1937. It wasn't their treaty ever, you know? And so, I mean, it's this fiasco, frivolous lawsuit. And that tribe spent millions of dollars over that $100 permit because it's Indian country. And Hobart won. You know? And Hobart won. And the judge defined Indian country so clearly and narrowly. He said, Indian country, you have authority over your federal trust lands only, period. Any other taxable lands in that reservation or former reservation are not Indian country. Well, that has pissed off all the tribes across the country. They say, oh man, we had Indian country rolling. That judge has now limited it to just federal trust land. So it's being appealed. And it'll go up to the Supreme Court. But just to show you, money's no object. And the more they can bully and run off and bankrupt the local municipalities and counties on their reservation, that's part of the game. The county where I live is just near bankruptcy. The tribe used to contribute annual dollars to the school districts in the county, no more. You know, and so trying to get rid of the municipalities, trying to say everything's Indian, revising history. Just like 30,000 bison roaming through the American prairie from 150 years ago in 2020. It's insane.
Are you aware of the Washington state law now that allows them to not pay on their deeded land? Okay.
No.
All they have to do is say, this takes us to sacred land. So let's say you've got a place in the river and you said that's sacred fishing area. Let's say you got 10 lots of land, 10 tens, leading to it, and they say we have to cross all this because it couldn't do it here, it couldn't do it here for whatever. We have to cross all that to get there. And this is an exaggerated version, but it gets the point across. If we need to cross this to get there, they no longer have to pay taxes, property taxes on it.
Oh, wow.
And that has decimated counties like ours even further, so that the rest of us all pay higher property taxes now. And I'll tell you, that one frustrated Dave Cook no end. And I think we've discovered maybe a way to change that, but it hasn't happened.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of work to do, but the biggest problem is the elected officials.
Yep,
The people we elect.
the higher up, the more.
They are so terrified of being called a name or having something that we put in the paper about them. It's so spineless. And there was a time when there was a massive respect for the oath of office. It's almost non-existent, as is our Constitution. I don't know how we change the elected officials. I don't know how we make, we get an elected official, a county, let's say a county commissioner, or let's say a state legislator, say, sir, have you taken money from a tribal government? Or have you taken money from a government that is not our republic government in form? If they say yes, they need to be knocked out. You don't vote them. That's why we have these coin-operated elected officials. How we encourage elected officials to, number one, remember there really is an oath of office, and remember, two, your constituents are the citizens in a republic form of government, not a tribal government. We have Olympia serving tribal governments. We have the state of Washington signaling to these tribes on a constant basis that their treaty rights and their tribal authority is superior to the state of Washington. Constantly subservient to the state of Washington, to the tribal governments, and that's coming from the people we put in office. We're putting them in office. The tribes are moneying them up, but we're the ones that mark the ballots. And when I say we, I mean it, because there's only 6% of the state's population that's tribal, and not all of those are voters. Very few tribal voters. But the tribal money is huge, and it's fools like the rest of us that are putting these moneyed up legislators in office. And we have to stop it. And the only way we can stop it is to start talking about it freely. And if somebody calls your name, you know, fine. That's what it's all about these days.